Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Everyone knows how much Ron and his family did for Harry Potter. The Weasleys welcomed him into their home, supported him through every trial, and fought alongside him against Voldemort. This family isn't just a vibrant part of the magical world. They are Harry's true foundation, but if you only know the story from the films, you've missed a lot. The Weasleys are one of the largest families in the wizarding world. Molly and Arthur have 7 children, and naturally not all of their stories made it to the screen. Today I'll tell you about some lesser-known facts about the Weasley family, known only to the readers of the books. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Percy saw Fred fall. One of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire series. When Percy Weasley, after years of estrangement from his family, suddenly returns to Hogwarts to fight alongside them, it's a shock to everyone. He arrives just as the family gathers and Molly is trying to keep Ginny from joining the fight. At that moment, Percy crosses the threshold of the Room of Requirement and, despite his guilt, throws himself into battle. He fights side by side with Fred, and their old brotherly bond rekindles. Laughter, jokes, shoulder to shoulder, and then an explosion. In a flash, everything crumbles. Percy, on his knees, stares at his brother's body. He doesn't cry. He simply cannot believe that he managed to return, but was still too late. Number 2. Percy turned his back on the family, but before this tragic moment came another, equally painful. After graduating from Hogwarts, Percy chose a career at the Ministry of Magic. He climbed the ladder quickly, first working under Bartemius Crouch, then becoming junior assistant to the minister. This all happened during a volatile time, when Fudge was denying Voldemort's return and battling Dumbledore. Percy found himself caught between two sides, his family, who stood with Harry and Dumbledore, and the ministry, where he sought success. He made his choice. He cut ties with his parents, brothers and sister. Even when the truth emerged, Percy stayed silent. It was only at the very last moment when the war reached Hogwarts that he returned. Too late for his brother, but not too late for redemption. Number 3, Bill was attacked by Fenrir Greyback. The battle at the Astronomy Tower was left out of the movies, but in the books it's one of the key scenes. After Dumbledore's murder, Snape and the Death Eaters attempted to escape the castle. No one expected them, but they were met head-on. Among the defenders was Bill Weasley. He took the blow from one of the most dangerous werewolves in the magical world, Fenrir Greyback. Fenrir wasn't in full wolf form, but it was enough to severely maim Bill. He was left with terrible facial scars and underwent lasting changes. Even his sense of taste altered. But most importantly, Fleur stood by him. Her determination to stay with Bill changed Molly's mind, and the hearts of the entire family. Number 4. The beginning of Bill and Fleur's relationship. Their wedding is featured in Deathly Hallows, but the road to it was long. It all started during the Triwizard Tournament, where Fleur first laid eyes on Bill. But their true relationship began later, when she started working at Gringotts, where Bill also worked. Their closeness grew gradually, but the family's acceptance came painfully. Molly and Ginny thought Fleur was shallow, but after Fenrir's attack, everything changed. Fleur didn't leave Bill. Her strength and loyalty melted even Molly's resistance. From that moment on, she became a true Weasley, not just in name, but in spirit. Number 5. Bill Weasley's appearance. When Harry first saw Ron's eldest brother, he expected another Percy. Strict, bookish, dull. But Bill looked more like a rock star of the wizarding world. Tall, with long hair tied back, a fang earring, and dragon-hide boots. He made an impression. Molly tried to get him to cut his hair, dress properly, and be like everyone else. But Bill remained true to himself. He had been a head boy, a top student, and a Gringotts professional, all while keeping his unique style. Bill proved that being proper didn't mean being boring. Number 6. The Weasley twins won a bet at the Quidditch World Cup. Fred and George weren't just the comic relief of the Weasley clan. In the books, they show cleverness, ambition, and a sharp business mind. The Quidditch World Cup final was a perfect example. They placed a bet with Ludo Bagman. Ireland would win, but Crumb would catch the snitch. That's exactly what happened. The twins won, but Bagman tried to swindle them, paying them in vanishing leprechaun gold. This storyline doesn't appear in the films, but it was the starting point for the twins' journey to launching their own business and gaining independence from the family. Number 7. Charlie Weasley helped organize the Triwizard Tournament. Charlie Weasley appears rarely in the books and is almost completely absent from the films, but his role in the Triwizard Tournament is important. He travelled from Romania, where he worked with dragons, to assist with the first task. He delivered the female dragons tasked with guarding the golden eggs. It was a dangerous and vital responsibility. After the tournament, Charlie returned to Romania but continued to support the Order of the Phoenix. He didn't fight in the final battle, but his contribution to the war effort was no less meaningful. Number 8. Why Molly didn't want the twins to open a joke shop. Molly Weasley never laughed at her son's jokes the way others did. To her, Fred and George's exploding sweets and trick wands weren't a career. They were a distraction. She wanted them safe, stable, employed at the ministry like Percy. She worried they were wasting their talents. In Order of the Phoenix, when the twins announced they were leaving Hogwarts mid-year without Newts, Molly was devastated. "You're throwing everything away," she cried. But they didn't see it that way. Their dream had never been desks and paperwork. It had always been mischief and magic. Then came the grand opening of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes in Diagon Alley. Even Molly couldn't deny it. The shop was a masterpiece. Crowds filled the storefront. Children begged their parents for skiving snack boxes. Wizards from the ministry snuck in during lunch breaks. Fred and George weren't just pranksters anymore. They were entrepreneurs. And slowly, Molly softened. She never stopped fretting, but in Half-Blood Prince, when she visited the shop and saw it for herself, she smiled. Quietly, proudly. Her boys had made something real, something brilliant, and she'd been wrong. Number 9. Arthur Weasley's obsession with muggles. Arthur Weasley didn't just study muggles, and he adored them. He asked questions no wizard ever bothered to ask. "What exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" he once said, eyes wide with wonder. His shed behind the burrow was a treasure trove of broken radios, plugs, batteries, and wire, all completely useless to most wizards, but fascinating to him. Molly often scolded him. She didn't understand why anyone needed 6 dismantled toasters or a box full of spark plugs that sparked too much. But Arthur couldn't help himself. To him, muggles were brilliant. In Chamber of Secrets, Arthur enchanted a Ford Anglia, not just to fly, but to be invisible and stretch on the inside. He knew it was illegal, but the temptation was too great. He hid it, half proud, half nervous. When Harry and Ron used it to crash into the Whomping Willow, Arthur panicked, not about the danger, but about the law. "Did you really?" he asked Ron. "Did it go all right? I mean, that was very wrong, boys. Very wrong indeed." He was caught between being a father and a fan. And in the end, it was clear. His fascination with the non-magical world wasn't just a hobby, it was love. Number 10. Ginny was a popular and talented Quidditch player. Ginny Weasley flew like she had fire in her blood. When Harry was banned from Quidditch in Order of the Phoenix, she took his place as seeker. And she didn't just fill the spot, she owned it. In her first match, she caught the snitch right under the nose of Cho Chang. The crowd roared. Even Harry admitted it. "Nice catch," he said, stunned. But Ginny didn't stop there. By Half-Blood Prince, she'd switched to chaser and became one of the fiercest scorers Gryffindor had ever seen. She played with speed, precision, and a kind of fearless joy. Lee Jordan once called her a human bludger for the way she darted through opponents. In one match against Ravenclaw, she scored 3 times in 10 minutes, weaving through defenders like they weren't even there. Her teammates trusted her, the school admired her, and her brothers, even Fred and George, watched her from the stands with pride. For Ginny, Quidditch wasn't just a game. It was where she proved she belonged. And she did, every single time she touched the broom. Number 11, the Weasley family clock, showed danger. The Weasley family clock had no numbers, just golden hands with names. Molly, Arthur, Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, George, Ron, and Ginny, circling words like home, work, travelling, and lost. But there was one label no one wanted to see: mortal peril. When Voldemort returned, all 9 hands pointed there. And they didn't move, not for days, not for weeks. Molly stared at it every morning, hoping the hands would shift. They never did. In Half-Blood Prince, the clock becomes more than a magical oddity. It's a mirror of the war. Every Weasley, even Percy, who was still estranged, was marked by danger. There were no safe places left, not for blood traitors, not for anyone who stood with Dumbledore. The silence around the clock became its own kind of fear. Molly never spoke of it. She only looked, lips pressed tight, as if trying to will the hands to safety. But magic couldn't lie. Her children were all in danger, and so was she. Number 12, Molly fought and defeated Bellatrix Lestrange. The moment Ginny nearly fell, something inside Molly Weasley snapped. She saw Bellatrix Lestrange laughing, her wand spinning, the curse barely missing Ginny's heart. And then, without a second of hesitation, Molly stepped forward. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" she screamed. It was the voice of a mother, not a soldier. But it was the most terrifying thing Bellatrix would ever hear. The great hall fell silent around them. No one dared to interfere. Spells flew like fire between them. Bellatrix was fast, deadly, confident. She had duelled auras, killed Sirius, tortured Neville's parents into madness, but she had never faced Molly Weasley's fury. In the book it says Molly's curse soared beneath Bellatrix's outstretched arm and hit her squarely in the chest, directly over her heart. The last Black Sister froze, then fell. Gone, just like that. The woman who served Voldemort with twisted pride was destroyed by the hands of a mother defending her child. For a moment, even Voldemort stopped. He turned. He saw her, Molly standing among the wreckage, trembling, wand still raised. She hadn't killed for power or revenge. She hadn't even meant to be a hero. But that moment became legend, not because Bellatrix died, but because love had been stronger than fear, because Molly Weasley, homemaker, knitter, mother of 7, had shown the world that true power doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears an apron. Number 13, Hermione became part of the Weasley family. When Hermione Granger wiped her parents' memories to protect them, she lost the only home she had ever known. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. But after that spell, she had nowhere to return. So she went to the Burrow, again and again, holidays, birthdays, summers. The Weasleys welcomed her without question. Molly made her sweaters. Arthur told her muggle jokes. Even Ginny shared secrets with her no one else heard. In Half-Blood Prince, Molly gives Hermione a Weasley family heirloom, a delicate gold watch. It's not just a gift, it's a message. She belonged. Molly Weasley always treated Hermione like one of her own. She made room at the table. She scolded her gently. When Fleur sneered at Hermione at Shell Cottage, it was Molly who stood firm, defending the girl she called dear. "You're as good as family," she once told her. There was no need to explain. Hermione had earned that place with loyalty, with courage, with how fiercely she stood by Ron through every trial. Even Fred and George teased her like a sister, sharp but affectionate. The bond was never just about romance, it was deeper. By the time the final battle began, Hermione wasn't just Ron's partner. She was a Weasley in every way that mattered. She fought for them, she cried with them. She stood at Fred's funeral with the rest of them in silence. And when the world slowly began to heal, she didn't need to be asked where home was. The Burrow had always been waiting, with Molly's cooking, Arthur's cluttered shed, and the room next to Ginny's still kept for her. Number 14. Ginny had a deep connection to Tom Riddle. Ginny Weasley never meant to trust Tom Riddle. She was only 11 when she found the old, battered diary slipped among her schoolbooks. It looked ordinary, safe. She had no idea it was a Horcrux, a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul, waiting patiently to be heard. Ginny, lonely and overwhelmed in her first year at Hogwarts, began to confide in it. "I've been writing in this diary for months," she told Harry later, her voice shaking. "He was like a friend. He listened." Tom didn't just listen, he wrote back. His words were warm, understanding, gentle, everything Ginny needed but didn't have. She poured her heart into those pages, her fears, her anger, her crush on Harry. And Riddle fed on it. Each secret she shared gave him more control. "Little Ginny's been writing in me for months," he said in the Chamber of Secrets, cold and triumphant. "Soon she'll have no will of her own." She started losing time, waking up in strange places, finding feathers, paint, even blood on her hands. And when the attacks began, the petrifications of Mrs. Norris, Justin Finch Fletchley, Hermione, Ginny was terrified it might be her. She was right. Riddle had been possessing her, slowly draining her soul. He used her to open the Chamber of Secrets, to release the basilisk, to carve those terrible messages in blood. "Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever," he hissed, as Ginny lay unconscious on the cold stone floor. He planned to kill her, a child, to restore his own life. That was the price of trust. That was the cost of loneliness. Ginny survived. Harry saved her. He stabbed the diary with the basilisk fang, destroying the fragment of Voldemort inside, but the damage left marks deeper than scars. Ginny never spoke about it much afterward, but something in her changed. She became tougher, sharper, harder to scare. She learned not to give away her heart so easily, and yet the memory of Tom Riddle's voice whispering from the pages never truly left her. Number 15. The Weasleys were tied to ancient magic. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Professor Slughorn utters a line that slips by most casual readers, but rings with meaning for those who pay close attention. "Arthur Weasley, isn't he? One of the old wizarding families, though poor. A very decent chap." It is a simple observation, yet it unlocks a forgotten truth about the Weasleys, one that is buried not in the glitz of social status, but in the roots of ancient magic. While the Malfoys and the Blacks paraded their pure-blood status like a badge, the Weasleys wore theirs like an old, threadbare coat, worn, humble, but unmistakably real. The deeper one reads into their story, the more it becomes evident. The Weasleys were not just any family. They were a relic of ancient magic, older than the Ministry, older than Hogwarts itself in some tales whispered by portraits and dusty scrolls in forgotten rooms. There is an unspoken reverence for the old ways embedded in everything they do. Molly Weasley's enchanted clock, for instance, is more than a clever trinket. With its 9 spinning hands for every member of the family, each pointing to statuses like mortal peril and at home, the clock is a masterpiece of pre-modern enchantment. Modern wizards would find such a device difficult to replicate, and even Dumbledore admired it. There's something primal in that magic, and the kind of spell that isn't taught at Hogwarts anymore, because it isn't about incantations or wand movements, it's about emotion, blood, and lineage. The clock doesn't just track locations, it feels danger. It speaks of magic infused with motherly instinct, of old protective enchantments cast in kitchens and hearths rather than dueling halls. The burrow itself is a monument to that same ancient magic. It stands not because of architectural logic, but because it wants to stand. The structure defies gravity, with rooms stacked like books on an unstable shelf. Most assume it is merely charm to stay upright, but the truth is stranger and more powerful. The burrow holds together because it is rooted in the land, in the ley lines that cross Ottery St. Catchpole. This village, unknown to muggles, rests at the confluence of magical energy that dates back to Druidic times. The Weasleys have lived there for generations, their blood becoming one with the earth beneath them. The burrow is less a house and more a manifestation of their magical bond with that soil. When Harry first sees it, he thinks, it looked as though it had once been a large stone pig pen, but extra rooms had been added here and there until it was several stories high. But he misses the point. The burrow doesn't follow blueprints. It grows like a tree, guided by the same laws that govern nature and magic in its purest form. Bill Weasley's fascination with ancient curses and tombs is more than a career at Gringotts. It is an echo of the bloodline reaching out across centuries. He feels at home among ruins, drawn instinctively to the magical remnants of civilizations long past. In Egypt, he's not just decoding spells, he's remembering. The goblins respect him not just for his skill, but for his uncanny sense for traps and protections, too old to be charted. The hat he wears, frayed and stitched and utterly out of fashion, belonged to his great-great-grandfather, a duelist who disappeared fighting a dark sorcerer in the early 1800s. Bill claimed it not for sentiment, but because he felt its magic. It protected him during his first dig in Alexandria, when a curse meant to transfigure his bones to glass failed spectacularly. His supervisor claimed it was luck, but Bill later confided in his father that he felt the hat pulse like a heartbeat when he wore it. Ginny's raw magical power was always a source of unease, even before the diary. The way she interacted with Tom Riddle's soul fragment wasn't just a tragedy of manipulation, it was a sign of deep magical sensitivity. Most students would have sensed something wrong with the diary, but Ginny bonded with it on an emotional level, pouring her thoughts and secrets into it like a conduit. This wasn't naivety alone, it was an ancestral trait, a dangerous openness that made her a beacon. When she later demonstrated an aptitude for the Bat Bogey Hex so advanced that even older students feared her, it wasn't just talent, it was inheritance. Her magic was visceral and emotional, as if her spells had marrow and muscle. In Order of the Phoenix, she summons a Patronus with ease, while others still struggle. It's a horse, strong, ancient, loyal, a creature that carries her family's magical burden with pride. Percy Weasley, though often dismissed for his pompous behavior, displayed a strange and subtle connection to magical authority. His obsession with structure and regulation wasn't just ambition, it was instinctual reverence for magical order. He respected the ministry not for its power, but because it represented the codification of something sacred. He once said, "Rules are there for a reason," and while it sounds like bureaucracy, it is also a trace of an older understanding, that magic, to be powerful, must be bound. The ancient magical traditions of the Weasleys weren't lawless. They believed in restraint, in rituals and boundaries. Percy, though unaware, embodied this ancestral trait, albeit in the stifling uniform of a ministry official rather than the wild robes of a hedge wizard. Number 16. The Weasleys had a garden gnome at home. In the overgrown garden of the burrow, amidst the enchanted gnomes Ron used to toss over the hedge and the chaotic clatter of magical contraptions, a small and easily missed presence once stirred. A creature never brought to light in the films, but given a quiet place in the pages of the Goblet of Fire. His name was Creaky, a garden gnome, not one of the wild pests that burrowed in wizarding lawns, but a domestic helper of sorts, unique to the Weasley family, and a detail only the readers of J.K. Rowling's books would know. His presence was brief and wrapped in the usual humorous lens through which the Weasley household filtered their eccentric world. Yet he added a brushstroke to the broader canvas of magical creature treatment, and through this to the moral compass that defined the Weasley family. Creaky was mentioned in passing, as Ron described to Harry how things were going at the burrow. Dad's been tinkering with that muggle lawnmower again, and Creaky's got himself stuck in it 3 times this week. It was a throwaway line, easy to overlook, but rich in implication. Unlike house elves such as Dobby, who suffered under the brutal heel of the Malfoys, Creaky was part of the Weasley chaos, not enslaved by it. He wasn't feared or beaten or silenced. He was laughed at, not with cruelty, but with the affectionate sighs of a family long used to magical mishaps. The burrow was never about perfection. It was a place where the wallpaper peeled with pride, the ghoul in the attic thumped like a drumline, and where even a bumbling gnome could have a place. While the Malfoys saw magical creatures as tools, objects to be broken or bound, the Weasleys did the opposite. They humanized them, not literally, of course, but emotionally. They granted them space. They never made Creaky wear a uniform or answer to a bell. He was never threatened with clothes, the cursed freedom that terrified most house elves, nor was he ever ordered around. He was just there. A presence, a helping hand that may not always help, but whose intent was never punished. It was in this gentle acceptance that the Weasleys showed who they were. Mrs. Weasley never expected perfection from anyone, least of all from magical beings like Creaky. When her clock pointed to mortal peril and time to feed the chickens in the same breath, she simply rolled up her sleeves and did what needed doing. Creaky might be flung into the garden fountain or knocked into a patch of stinging nettles, but no one blamed him. In a world where most magical families controlled their creatures through fear or spells, the Weasleys let theirs trip over themselves and learn. They created a home where magic was messy and creatures were welcome, not worshipped or whipped. The irony lies in how little attention Creaky gets. In a story filled with grand creatures, dragons, hippogriffs, centaurs, it is the tiny domestic figures like Creaky and Dobby who reveal the deepest truths about the people they serve. Where Dobby bore the scars of Lucius Malfoy's cruelty, Creaky bore the mud on his nose from chasing garden gnomes with a broken rake. The contrast is quiet but profound. It is in these small differences that entire ideologies are laid bare. Arthur Weasley, who collected muggle plugs and called escalators fascinating, would never understand treating a magical being as beneath him. His fascination with the world came from a place of humility, of curiosity, not control. This philosophy extended to Creaky. Arthur didn't enchant the gnome to work harder. He didn't assign him tasks or demand order. He just allowed him to exist within the delightful disorder of the burrow. And in doing so, he extended a kind of silent respect to a creature that most wizards wouldn't give a second glance. Even Fred and George, known for their pranks and mischief, never used Creaky as a prop for laughs. They made fireworks explode in their bedroom and enchanted snowballs to pelt Quirrell's turban, but Creaky was left out of it. There was an unspoken rule in the Weasley home. Mischief was fair game, but cruelty was not. You could tease your brother until he turned purple, but you didn't make fun of someone who couldn't fight back. That line, blurry elsewhere in the wizarding world, was clear in the burrow. The magical community had long struggled with the ethics of creature rights. Hermione's formation of SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, was often mocked by her peers. Even Ron, for all his kindness, found her passion embarrassing. But Creaky stood as a quiet rebuttal to the status quo. He didn't need liberation, he needed understanding, and he had it. The Weasleys didn't start a movement, but they lived the values Hermione preached. Their actions, small, habitual, unseen, were the quiet revolution that didn't make headlines, but changed hearts. There's a passage in The Goblet of Fire where Harry notices the goblin-faced creature in the garden, muttering to himself and carrying a small rake. It's Creaky. No spell restrains him. No insult is hurled. He mutters like a crotchety old man, not a slave. His complaints aren't fear-based. They are genuine frustrations, the kind anyone might have when their job doesn't go according to plan. And the Weasleys? They let him complain. They let him be. The domestic gnome doesn't exist in the films, and that erasure speaks volumes. The visual medium chose to omit the quiet relationships that don't spark battles or lend themselves to epic soundtracks. But in doing so, they erased a piece of the Weasley truth. Creaky's absence in the films makes it easier to forget that kindness is sometimes found in the subplots in the unglamorous parts of a wizard's life where garden gnomes get stuck in compost heaps. Number 17. The family owned rare magical artifacts. Though the Weasleys were never wealthy in the conventional sense, their home, the Burrow, was brimming with magic, not the polished, expensive sort found in wizarding mansions, but the wild, unpredictable kind that pulsed with personality. To the casual observer, it might have appeared cluttered and chaotic, but to those with a discerning eye, it held treasures of rare, magical craftsmanship. Nowhere else in the wizarding world would one find such a delightful accumulation of enchanted oddities, many of which never made their way into the film adaptations. Among the most fascinating of these was the notorious magical bin located near the kitchen, which developed a mind of its own over the years. As described in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the bin had a habit of throwing things back out if it decided the contents were still usable. Molly Weasley once attempted to dispose of a pair of threadbare socks only to have them spat at her face in protest. "It threw them back out," she grumbled, "because apparently they're still wearable." The sentient bin wasn't just a quirky addition. It was a symbol of the Weasleys' deep-rooted respect for utility, making even refuse an object of debate. Then there was the rug in the living room, a worn, moth-eaten mat that had once, long ago, attempted to devour Fred when he was a toddler. Arthur had retold the story with chuckling fondness, explaining how the rug had been charmed, or perhaps cursed, by one of his muggle artifacts gone awry. It had lunged at the boy with alarming enthusiasm, attempting to swallow him whole before Molly banished it to the attic for a decade. Fred, unscathed but delighted, had referred to it ever after as the hungry carpet. It returned to its place only when Bill was grown and tamed it with a charm he learned while working at Gringotts. In the corner of the kitchen sat a set of battered saucepans, none of which were ordinary. Each of them cleaned itself, banged its lid in protest when overused, and let out a steamy hiss if someone dared to leave remnants of stew inside. These enchanted pans were often seen hovering above the sink, arguing amongst themselves with loud clangs. Though they had no mouths, their clashing and clanging formed a language of their own, a domestic cacophony that served as the Weasleys' kitchen soundtrack. Another relic of understated brilliance was the wireless radio hidden beneath a false panel in the scullery. Far more than a simple receiver, this device picked up broadcasts that were technically illegal during the rise of Voldemort, messages from the Resistance, reports from Potter Watch, and warnings that could mean the difference between life and death. "The radio's broken, dear," Molly would say to guests, but the glint in her eye betrayed the truth. It hummed with defiance, a crackling beacon for those who dared to listen. Perhaps the most unnerving object in the burrow was the mirror in the upstairs hallway, which didn't reflect appearances but revealed the face of whomever called your name aloud. It had no frame, only a swirling mist behind the glass, and when someone said, "Ron," the surface would shiver and show the boy wherever he was. It startled Harry once, late at night, when he called for Ginny and saw her sitting on her bed humming to herself. The mirror had no sense of privacy or discretion, or it simply obeyed. Such a magical item would have been valuable to any auror or spy, and yet here it was, tucked into a creaking farmhouse corridor. Even the ghoul in the attic, often mistaken for a nuisance, was enchanted in ways few fully understood. While not an artifact in the traditional sense, it had been part of the household for so long that it had acquired habits, mimicking sounds of the family, groaning louder during arguments, and rattling its chains when it felt neglected. When Ron disguised it to look like himself during the Horcrux hunt, it proved eerily cooperative, suggesting a level of awareness not typically associated with attic ghouls. Then there was the garden gnome repeller, built by Arthur from muggle parts and dragon sinew. While it never functioned properly, often attracting more gnomes than it repelled, it emitted an odd frequency that caused magical birds to lay square eggs. Arthur considered it one of his prouder failures, and it remained lodged beside the tool shed, humming and glowing green, despite Molly's repeated threats to dismantle it. In Ginny's room, hidden beneath her mattress, was a diary-sized box with a protective spell against snooping siblings. It had been a gift from Bill created during his days in Egypt. The box could only be opened by the owner's touch, and once revealed, it showed written entries and illustrations that vanished after 5 seconds, preserving secrets in a way not even Rita Skeeter could breach. It was an innocent thing, meant for sketches and dreams, but the level of charm work required placed it in the category of rare, magical craftsmanship. Charlie's room, long vacated but never truly abandoned, contained a preserved dragon scale from his time in Romania. The scale pulsed faintly and responded to heat, glowing bright orange when touched by fire. It was embedded in a wooden plaque with a protective spell, and some swore they could hear it hum on stormy nights. Molly kept it dusted, speaking to it softly now and then, as if Charlie himself might hear her words from across the world. The attic held other marvels. A weather globe, an old ministry prototype Arthur salvaged, sat beside a pile of forgotten broomsticks. It changed colour and temperature depending on the forecast, often weeks ahead of time. Its predictions were more accurate than the daily prophets, and though it had once turned purple and exploded when snow was forecast in July, Arthur still checked it every morning. Number 18, why no Weasley ended up in Slytherin. Of all the curiosities buried within the pages of the Harry Potter series, one detail that continues to escape casual fans is the remarkable consistency of the Weasley family's placement at Gryffindor. Not a single one of Arthur and Molly Weasley's 7 children found themselves sorted into Slytherin, a pattern that may appear coincidental at first glance, but upon closer examination reveals a profound truth about the family's character. The Weasleys weren't just sorted into Gryffindor by chance. They embodied it, every freckled, red-headed one of them. Their loyalty, courage, and fierce devotion to justice weren't learned traits, but inherited values passed down like the family clock or the hand-me-down robes. And while the Sorting Hat considers multiple qualities in its deliberations, with the Weasleys, the decision was almost reflexive. Their souls belonged to Gryffindor before they even stepped foot on the scarlet-carpeted train. Ron Weasley, the youngest son, perhaps represented this tradition most vulnerably. Born into a family where all 6 of his older siblings had worn the Gryffindor lion on their chests, he arrived at Hogwarts burdened by expectation. On the train, before even reaching the castle, Ron admitted, "I don't want to be in Slytherin." His fear wasn't born of logic, but of legacy. The very word Slytherin sounded like betrayal to him. Yet, ironically, he feared it because he believed the Sorting Hat might consider it. He was wrong. The Hat, sensing his heart, his yearning to belong to his family's proud tradition, barely hesitated. "Ah, another Weasley! I know just what to do with you, Gryffindor!" it cried, as if the path had already been laid. But the real question is deeper than Ron's insecurities. Why, generation after generation, do the Weasleys never deviate from Gryffindor? The answer is not about house loyalty, but about ideological opposition. The Weasleys' world, their values, their behavior, their relationships, is a quiet, persistent rebellion against everything Slytherin holds sacred. Where Slytherin reveres ambition, the Weasleys revere kindness. Where Slytherin treasures blood purity, the Weasleys live modestly, surrounded by muggle artifacts and friends of every background. When Arthur Weasley, a ministry official, risks career stagnation to run the Muggle Artifacts Office, a department so insignificant it practically runs itself, it is not incompetence, it is conviction. Arthur Weasley, himself a former Gryffindor, once charmed a rubber duck just to understand its purpose. This curiosity wasn't academic, it was compassionate. He loved Muggles, not just tolerated them. He respected their resourcefulness and wanted to understand their lives. This attitude placed him in direct opposition to the pureblood supremacist ideology often cultivated in Slytherin. His fascination with the non-magical world wasn't fashionable or strategic. It was inconvenient and ridiculed, yet he never stopped. That kind of courage, moral courage, is the beating heart of Gryffindor. Molly Weasley, too, stood as a symbol of uncompromising empathy. Though she stayed home to raise her children, her role was never passive. She raised 7 fiercely independent children during a time when the world was cracking under Voldemort's return. She knitted sweaters, baked pies, and made sure her children knew love like a shield. But when the time came to protect them, she transformed into a lioness. When Bellatrix Lestrange, Slytherin's own dark daughter, threatened her daughter Ginny during the Battle of Hogwarts, Molly roared, "Not my daughter, you bitch!" and struck her down. That moment was Gryffindor in its purest form, maternal rage turned into righteous action. The Weasleys raised their children with those same values, not just courage, but clarity, the ability to tell right from wrong without checking a rulebook. Fred and George, the wildest of the bunch, lived this to the extreme. They turned mischief into protest, laughter into resistance. When they dropped out of Hogwarts in a blaze of fireworks and rebellion, it wasn't just a joke, it was a political act. They rejected the authoritarian rule of Dolores Umbridge, a ministry pawn, and inspired a generation of students to resist. Could such defiance have grown in the shadowy conservatism of Slytherin? Unlikely. Fred and George were Gryffindor through and through, not because they broke rules, but because they broke them for the right reasons. Percy, often cited as the black sheep, may seem like a counterexample. He chose ambition. He chose authority. He aligned with the ministry at the height of its blindness, but even Percy, beneath the layers of self-righteousness, never abandoned his core. When the truth about Voldemort became undeniable, Percy returned, not quietly, but with conviction. He fought in the Battle of Hogwarts. He wept over Fred's body. He was a Weasley again, not because he changed houses, but because he remembered who he was. A Gryffindor misled, not lost. Ginny Weasley, the youngest and only daughter, might be the clearest example of why no Weasley belonged in Slytherin. From her first year, she was confronted with darkness, possessed by Tom Riddle's diary, forced to live in his shadow. But even then she emerged unbroken. She didn't cower, she joined Dumbledore's army. She fought Death Eaters, she became a powerful witch, unshaken by trauma. She refused to be silenced or sidelined. And yet Ginny also embodied the Weasley principle of never hating blindly. She dated a Slytherin boy, Blaise Zabini, for a brief period in her 5th year, not because he was safe, but because he proved himself decent. It didn't last, but it symbolized the Weasley code: judge people by actions, not affiliations. It's important to understand that the Weasleys never despised Slytherins. The idea that Gryffindor and Slytherin are eternal enemies is a schoolyard myth, one often spread by children too young to know better. Molly and Arthur taught their children not to generalize. They warned against arrogance, not ambition, against cruelty, not cunning. When the war fractured the school and the houses turned on each other, the Weasleys resisted that division. They fought alongside Slytherins like Horace Slughorn, a man Arthur had known for decades and respected deeply despite their differing views. Even in war, the Weasleys never forgot their humanity. There's also the legacy of Bill and Charlie Weasley, often overlooked. Bill, the eldest, became a curse breaker for Gringotts. That alone required enormous bravery and moral flexibility, traits that sometimes align more with Slytherin than Gryffindor. But Bill, with his dragon-hide boots and long hair, never sought power for its own sake. He sought knowledge, experience, and the thrill of protecting others. Charlie, who worked with dragons in Romania, risked his life daily, not for prestige, but because he loved the creatures. Both brothers lived adventurous lives, but never manipulative ones. Their choices were about passion, not position. Even the family home, the Burrow, says something profound about the Weasleys' values. It's a house built on warmth, not wealth. It stands as a crooked testament to improvisation, loyalty, and love. The Weasleys didn't pursue influence. They built a haven. They opened it to Harry, to Hermione, to countless others. They made room, always. Contrast this with the cold, ancestral pride of Malfoy Manor, Slytherin's fortress. One is a sanctuary, the other a symbol. The difference is not architectural, it is philosophical. The moment Harry saw the Weasleys at King's Cross Station in his first year, he was drawn to them not just because they were kind, but because they felt right. They embodied everything he'd been denied: affection, chaos, care. When Mrs. Weasley gave him a hand-knitted sweater for Christmas, she wasn't just offering warmth, she was offering belonging. That kind of love, given freely, is not just rare, it is revolutionary. And it is utterly incompatible with the cold calculation Slytherin often demands. And yet, the books show us that the Weasleys' values weren't always rewarded. They were poor. They were mocked. They were disrespected by their own ministry, by Draco Malfoy, even by Percy for a time. But they never changed. They never hardened. Their loyalty was unwavering, not because it made them strong, but because it made them good. In a world tempted by power, they chose decency. In a war fed by fear, they chose love. The Sorting Hat famously said, "Slytherin will help you on your way to greatness." But the Weasleys never wanted that kind of greatness. They wanted justice. They wanted each other. They wanted to be brave enough to stand on the right side, even if it was the losing one. That is Gryffindor. That is Weasley. Still, the story of the Weasleys is not an argument against Slytherin. It is a testament to choice. The Weasleys didn't despise Slytherin. They simply never belonged there. Their hearts, moulded by years of laughter, sacrifice, and resilience, beat to the rhythm of a different drum. They chose empathy over elitism, action over strategy, family over fortune. And perhaps that is why they endured. When the war ended and the dust settled on the ruins of Hogwarts, the Weasleys remained whole, not untouched, but unbroken. Fred was gone, but his spirit lived on in George. Percy was changed, but grounded. Ginny soared. Ron found purpose. Arthur and Molly kept their family stitched together with the same threads of love that once knit Harry's first sweater. They didn't just survive the war, they healed from it. In the end, the fact that no Weasley ever ended up in Slytherin isn't a coincidence. It is the logical result of a legacy built on courage, humility, and integrity. It's not a condemnation of Slytherin, but a celebration of what Gryffindor can mean when it's lived sincerely. The Weasleys weren't perfect, but they were real, and they proved that being sorted into Gryffindor wasn't about being brave for glory, but about being brave for love. Number 19. How Bill Learned to Work with Goblins. Bill Weasley was never the kind of wizard who longed for glory in the spotlight. He was a trail-worn, dust-covered scholar with a heart full of fire and a mind sharp enough to unlock secrets buried under centuries of stone. Long before he became Fleur Delacour's husband or fought the Battle of Hogwarts, Bill walked the shifting sands of Egypt as a curse-breaker for Gringotts Bank. Not in the opulence of the marble halls where goblins weighed gold beneath crystal chandeliers, but far from the polished counters in ruins forgotten by time and protected by ancient deadly magic. There, among the remnants of ancient civilizations, Bill forged a bond not with wizards but with goblins. It was the goblins who taught Bill their ways, not through kindness or generosity, but through necessity. Goblins respected strength, knowledge, and above all, the will to survive. Bill learned early that flattery earned nothing with them. It was action, precision, and understanding that built trust, however fragile. They watched him work, delicate hands hovering over glyphs, bloodied fingers unraveling invisible hexes, and they judged him. Every step through a tomb laced with jinxes became a silent test. Over time, the goblins began to include him in their councils, not as an equal, but as a rare wizard who listened more than he spoke. Bill understood that goblins didn't hoard gold out of greed, but out of principle. To them, treasure was sacred, tied to lineage and legacy. In Cairo, a goblin named Ragnok once showed Bill a cursed pendant encased in obsidian. It had once belonged to a goblin king and had been stolen by a wizard centuries ago. Gringotts had recovered it at great cost. Bill was asked to neutralize its enchantments, and he did, but what struck him most was not the curse. It was the reverence Ragnok had for the pendant, as if he were holding a fragment of his soul. These were not the stories Hogwarts taught. At school, goblins were reduced to caricatures, grumpy bankers, clever with numbers, fond of gold. No mention of the rituals they performed before entering tombs, or the songs they sang to call upon the spirits of metal and stone. Bill saw it all. He began keeping journals not only of the enchantments he broke, but of the beliefs and customs he encountered. One entry, written in faded ink, read, "Goblins never forget. Payment is transaction, not surrender. Ownership is eternal in their eyes." This seemingly small insight would later become one of the most important lessons Bill shared with Harry Potter. During the war, when time was marked by loss and decisions had to be made in shadows, Harry, Ron and Hermione began to consider the unthinkable, breaking into Gringotts. The goal was not gold but a Horcrux, a sliver of Voldemort's soul hidden in the Lestrange vault. The trio turned to Bill not for maps or passwords, but for something more elusive: understanding. Bill didn't sugarcoat the truth. He told them that goblins and wizards had fought wars over less, that the very idea of taking something, even to save the world, was an unforgivable betrayal to goblin kind. He explained how goblins believed that the original maker of an object retained its ownership, no matter what deal was struck. If a goblin crafted a sword and sold it, the goblin still believed it was his. This principle lay at the heart of their worldview. It wasn't theft, to them, that broke trust. It was the idea that wizards thought they could own what was not rightfully theirs. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Bill delivers this warning with a gravity that few others could have managed. The goblins don't trust wizards. They never have. You can't blame them. We've done nothing to make them trust us. These were not just words. They came from a man who had once stood in torch-lit vaults beside goblins who had lost brothers to wizard raids centuries ago. Bill knew that their mistrust was not born of paranoia, but of lived history. The sword of Godric Gryffindor was at the center of this conflict. Though it had once belonged to the Hogwarts founder, goblins claimed it was made by Ragnok I, the greatest goblin smith of his age. They insisted it had been stolen, and generations had passed down this grievance like a wound that would never heal. To wizards, it was a relic of heroism. To goblins, it was a crime unresolved. When Harry offered the sword as collateral to Griphook the goblin, who would help them break into Gringotts, it was not seen as barter. It was a reclamation. Bill tried to warn Harry of this. He knew, perhaps better than any wizard alive, that Griphook did not consider the sword a prize to be shared. In truth, Griphook felt entitled to it. For him, it was justice. Bill saw the look in Harry's eyes, saw how the boy who had been hunted for years now stood with desperation etched into his every word. But still he pressed, "Just be careful. Goblins aren't like us when it comes to possession." These were not the idle musings of a bank employee. They were the hard-won truths of a man who had walked among the dead to learn the language of the living. What's remarkable is that none of this is in the films. Viewers see Bill only briefly as a brother, a husband, a background figure in the war. His time in Egypt, his bond with goblins, his role as a bridge between two fractured worlds, it's all left in the silence between scenes. But in the books, J.K. Rowling crafted him as a quiet keystone in a vast and trembling structure. Without Bill's guidance, Harry might have misjudged Griphook entirely, might have walked into Gringotts not with a fragile agreement, but with a time bomb of cultural ignorance. It was in Egypt, under the pale sun and the shadows of statues older than Britain itself, that Bill learned how deeply magical history ran. He stood before sarcophagi that hummed with curses and vault doors that whispered threats in ancient tongues. And always the goblins were there, watching, judging, teaching in their own cryptic way. Bill didn't flinch. He listened, he learned, and that, more than any incantation, earned him their respect. When Fleur met Bill, it wasn't his rugged looks or dragon-burned face that captivated her. It was the way he spoke of foreign lands with reverence, the way he described goblin festivals and tomb dances like sacred songs. He treated even the darkest magic with a sort of solemn awe. Fleur came from a culture steeped in tradition, and she saw in Bill not just a man, but a storyteller of the world beneath the surface. Bill never claimed to understand goblins completely. That would have been arrogance, but he understood them enough to know that the wizarding world was teetering on centuries of broken promises. In war, alliances are formed and broken with the ease of spellwork, but trust? That is harder to build than a pyramid and easier to shatter than glass. Bill's quiet wisdom echoed in the choices Harry made, the words he used, the caution he showed when dealing with Griphook. And though it did not stop betrayal, it shaped the course of their journey. Even when the plan fell apart and the dragon roared through the broken floors of Gringotts, Bill's warnings hung in the air like smoke. Harry knew, deep down, that Griphook's departure with the sword was not a trick. It was inevitability. He had entered a contract written not in ink, but in misunderstanding. The moment he took back the sword, the fragile thread between goblin and wizard snapped. Bill had tried to teach him this, that magic may change forms, but betrayal always feels the same. In retrospect, Bill's chapters in Egypt are not just world-building. They are lessons in diplomacy, humility, and the quiet kind of bravery that doesn't come with fanfare. He didn't duel dark wizards for sport. He didn't chase fame. He explored ruins where curses were older than Hogwarts itself, and he made friends with creatures most wizards dismissed. In doing so, he held up a mirror to the wizarding world and showed them the cracks they refused to see. There's a reason goblins speak of Bill Weasley with a sort of gruff respect, not because he was special, but because he treated them as if they were. He didn't pretend to be one of them. He didn't try to dominate their lore or outwit their customs. He simply walked beside them, tomb after tomb, and earned his place by surviving what should have killed him. In a world where wizards often believed they were owed obedience, Bill believed he had to earn trust. In every ancient vault he opened, every curse he unravelled, Bill left behind more than a record for Gringotts. He left a legacy of understanding. It is this legacy that makes him one of the most quietly important characters in the series. He never held a prophecy. He didn't destroy a Horcrux, but he gave the Chosen One knowledge that no wand could conjure, the knowledge of another point of view. And that is what the films could never quite capture. Bill's story is not one of spectacle, but of substance. A tale of dusty scrolls, buried temples, whispered warnings, and a man who dared to cross not just deserts, but cultural chasms. He may have started as a curse breaker, but in the end, Bill Weasley was something rarer, an ambassador between worlds that never truly trusted each other. And in the chaos of war, sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest truths. Number 20, Molly homeschooled her children. Of all the quietly remarkable things Molly Weasley accomplished in her life, the world remembers her most vividly for her love, her fierce protection of her children, and her iconic duel with Bellatrix Lestrange. But hidden in the background of her bustling home, beyond the aroma of stew and the flutter of enchanted knitting needles, lies a detail so quietly tucked into the pages of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone that most readers overlook its significance entirely. Before any of her 7 children ever boarded the Hogwarts Express, before they donned robes and clutched wands and trembled under the sorting hat, they were students in the makeshift classroom of the Burrows kitchen. It was there, amidst chipped teacups and hand-me-down cauldrons, that Molly Prewett Weasley became their very first teacher. This wasn't homeschooling in the way pure-blood aristocrats like the Malfoys might have imagined it, with private tutors imported from Durmstrang or rare books bound in dragonhide. It was a necessity born out of frugality and grit. The Weasleys could not afford private magical instruction for their children, and certainly not the costly pre-Hogwarts preparatory courses offered in Diagon Alley. Arthur Weasley's modest salary at the ministry barely covered the essentials, and every sickle had to be stretched. Molly, who had once earned her own excellent grades at Hogwarts, stepped into the role without hesitation. And so, Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, George, Ron, and even Ginny learned to levitate feathers and brew boiling nettle tea, not from professors in high towers, but from their mother, standing in a patched apron, wand in hand. The books she used were relics, dog-eared, faded, some missing pages. "We've got heaps of old spell books," Ron once told Harry, in the Philosopher's Stone, belonging to Bill and Charlie and Percy. These books had passed from hand to hand, from brother to brother, with Molly carefully annotating spells in the margins, correcting errors, adding reminders like "stir counterclockwise" or "do not try this if you've had less than 5 hours of sleep." They were not modern textbooks, but they were made alive by the voice and presence of their mother. The home education Molly provided was not just technical, it was deeply personal, rooted in instinct and maternal understanding. When young Percy asked too many questions about the precise wand movements required for switching spells, she indulged him. When Fred and George transformed soup ladles into rubber chickens for the 3rd time in a week, she scolded them, but secretly smiled. When Ron struggled to remember the ingredients for a simple boil-cure potion, she sat beside him at the kitchen table, repeating the list until he could recite it in his sleep. These lessons were not just about magic. They were about resilience, patience, humility, and laughter. There is something profound in the idea that the mother of the most endearingly chaotic family in the wizarding world managed to prepare all her children well enough that they could hold their own alongside children with far more resources. Ron Weasley may have arrived at Hogwarts with hand-me-down robes and a wand that had seen better days, but his magical knowledge was enough to keep him from falling behind. He was not a top student, but he was competent, and that was no accident. That was Molly's doing. Her work, invisible to the outside world, ensured that her children did not begin their journey at a disadvantage. Fred and George's inventive mischief may seem at odds with structured lessons, but in truth, they were sharp and intuitive learners. Their ability to create their own line of magical products later in life did not spring out of thin air. It came from a foundation in magical theory and experimentation that had its roots in those early days at the Burrow. Molly taught them the rules, and they learned how to bend them. Her instruction was not restrictive, but flexible, nurturing curiosity alongside caution. Percy, the rule-following prefect, often projected an image of self-sufficiency, but his sense of discipline and academic excellence was born under Molly's roof. She recognized his need for order and fueled it with structured lessons and detailed feedback. He thrived under her guidance. Even Ginny, the youngest and the only girl, was not excluded from these lessons, though she would have to wait a year longer than her brothers to attend Hogwarts. Molly's commitment to her daughter's education was just as passionate, and by the time Ginny stepped into the Great Hall, she was more than prepared. When Harry Potter first met Molly at King's Cross, she was instructing her children with calm authority. Packed with muggles, of course. She guided them not just toward the platform, but toward their future. That moment, though brief, exemplifies her role as a teacher, not merely of spells and potions, but of life itself. Her children respected her, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it, one lesson at a time. In the Order of the Phoenix, Molly's character is often seen through the lens of worry and overprotectiveness, but this concern for her children is not sudden. It is a continuation of a lifetime of teaching, of standing between them and the world's dangers. Her voice, sometimes shrill, is the voice of a woman who never stopped being a teacher, even after her children had grown. When she demanded that Fred and George behave in Grimmauld Place, or scolded Ron for joining the DA without telling her, she was still trying to instruct, to shield, to prepare. The sacrifices involved in being a mother of 7 are rarely glamorous, and even more rarely acknowledged. Molly's role in her children's magical education was likely unnoticed by the rest of the wizarding world. Hogwarts professors saw the results, students who were ready, more or less, to absorb formal instruction, but they may not have known the humble kitchen classroom that paved the way. Her teaching bore fruit quietly, without awards or certificates, yet it left a mark more permanent than any Abuel grade. One particular moment in The Goblet of Fire captures the depth of Molly's involvement in her children's development. When she arrives at the 3rd task of the Triwizard Tournament, she brings with her not just support for Harry, but also years of embedded maternal wisdom. "It wasn't your fault," she says to Harry, holding him like one of her own. That instinct to reassure, to educate through comfort, to heal through presence, that's Molly. That's the teacher who taught her own sons how to hold a wand and her daughter how to fly. Molly's educational role also influenced the family's moral compass. She taught her children not just spells but values. Bill became a curse-breaker, Charlie a dragon handler, both risky jobs requiring courage and competence. Percy, despite his flaws, valued order and ethics. Fred and George, for all their rebellion, championed joy and innovation. Ron, often insecure, still stood by his friends through the darkest moments. Ginny, fierce and independent, never let herself be diminished. These were not accidents. Molly raised them with purpose. Even Dumbledore recognized Molly's strength. In The Half-Blood Prince, when he allows her to be part of the Order's inner workings, it's not just because she is Arthur's wife, it's because she's proven herself. The woman who taught 7 children how to cast Lumos by candlelight was now helping to fight Voldemort's darkness with equal resolve. Her home lessons had evolved into wartime strategy, her maternal instinct into bravery. The magic of the Weasley family is not in the grandeur of their abilities, but in the consistency of their love. Molly's teaching style mirrored this. She emphasized repetition, warmth, and emotional connection. Her lessons were not timed by bells, but by meal times. She used food as reinforcement, encouragement as reward. When Fred got a transfiguration spell wrong, she would ruffle his hair and make him peel potatoes. When Ginny nailed a charm, she got a second helping of treacle tart. Discipline and celebration went hand in hand. It is perhaps no coincidence that Harry, orphaned and hungry for affection, gravitated to the Weasleys. Molly's role in his life became a quiet echo of what she had already done for her own children. Though she didn't teach him spells directly, she taught him other things, how to receive love, how to feel safe. She knitted him a jumper, sent him homemade fudge, scolded him when he risked his life recklessly. These were lessons too, just of a different kind. The memory of Molly standing over a cauldron, teaching Ron how to brew a basic potion, while keeping an eye on the twins, turning biscuits into bouncing frogs, captures a time that passed without fanfare. But its impact was immeasurable. It meant that no Weasley child ever felt alone in their magical journey. It meant that each of them stepped into Hogwarts knowing their mother had already given them something priceless, belief in their ability to learn. And so, though the books may not dwell on it, and the films never mention it, the truth remains, before they were students of Snape or Flitwick or McGonagall, the Weasley children were students of Molly. Their first classroom was their home, their first wand work practiced in front of a fireplace, their first lessons wrapped in the scent of cinnamon and the sound of a mother's voice. Her efforts did not seek recognition, but they shaped a generation. In every triumph her children achieved, from Quidditch wins to fighting Death Eaters, a quiet echo of her early teaching resounded. When the war ended and the dust settled, the wizarding world looked to heroes, Harry Hermione, Ron. But among them stood a mother who had never sought the spotlight. She had not only raised warriors, she had educated them. Her curriculum was love, her legacy, sevenfold. Number 21. The Weasleys opposed blood purity. In a world where bloodline often defined worth, the Weasley family stood defiantly against the tide. Their home, the Burrow, nestled in the countryside near Ottery St. Catchpole, was more than just a crooked house filled with noise and love. It was a symbol of resistance, a quiet rebellion against the values so many pure-blood families held dear. They were poor, yes, and mocked for it, but it was not their lack of galleons that earned them scorn from the likes of the Malfoys. It was their principles. The Weasleys did not believe in blood purity. They never had. And unlike others who kept their dissent hidden behind closed doors, they wore their beliefs like a badge of honor, visible to anyone who dared look. Arthur Weasley, the patriarch of the family, had a curious fascination with muggles, a trait considered disgraceful in many circles. He worked in the misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, a lowly department that hardly matched his intelligence or talent. He could have aimed higher, but he chose that path deliberately. His time was not spent climbing bureaucratic ladders, but understanding how Muggles lived, thought, and survived without magic. He didn't merely study them, he admired them. He kept a flying car in his shed and treasured plugs and batteries like rare magical artifacts. When Lucius Malfoy mocked him for it in Flourish and Blot, saying, "What's the use of being a disgrace to the name of wizard if they don't even pay you well for it?" Arthur's response wasn't verbal. He punched Lucius then and there. It wasn't about pride, it was about standing up for people who had no one to fight for them. Molly Weasley, for her part, was the embodiment of maternal warmth and fierce loyalty. She welcomed everyone into her home, not because it was expected, but because it was right. Harry Potter, a boy orphaned and neglected, found in her a mother figure he never knew he needed. "You're not going back to that awful Muggle family," she said, stuffing his plate with food and his heart with something long forgotten: love. Hermione Granger, a Muggle-born girl who was often the target of prejudice, was never made to feel different in the Weasley home. She was one of them. When Rita Skeeter's lies in the Daily Prophet painted Hermione as a manipulative social climber, it was Molly who saw through the smear campaign and defended her. She knew what kind of girl Hermione truly was: brave, kind, brilliant, and none of it had anything to do with her blood. The Weasleys were not without their critics. They were sneered at in ministry corridors and derided in high society gatherings. The term blood traitor clung to them like a curse, but to the Weasleys it was not an insult. It was a declaration. They were traitors, not to their blood, but to the ideology that twisted the meaning of lineage into a weapon. They chose people over pedigree, courage over conformity. In doing so, they raised 7 children who mirrored those same values. Each of them, in their own way, resisted the allure of superiority and stood firm against the storm that was rising in the wizarding world. Bill Weasley worked at Gringotts, not just as a curse breaker, but as a bridge between cultures. He operated in Egypt among magical artifacts and ancient curses, learning from other wizarding traditions, unbothered by notions of British superiority. When he returned home and eventually married Fleur Delacour, a half-feeler from France, he didn't do so with fear of judgment. The Weasleys embraced Fleur even if it took time and understood that love transcended all magical divisions. It wasn't her bloodline that mattered. It was her bravery during the Battle of Hogwarts, her loyalty to Bill, her strength when the world was falling apart. Charlie Weasley chose dragons over debates, but his work in Romania was a silent act of defiance too. He surrounded himself with magical creatures and wizards from all over the globe, thriving in a world where no one asked about ancestry. He never married, never settled, but his life was a testament to how wide the world was and how petty blood prejudice seemed in the grand scheme of things. Percy, though briefly lost to ambition and deluded loyalty to the ministry, eventually returned. His fall was not from belief in blood superiority, but in authority. And when he saw the truth, the Ministry's corruption, its denial of Voldemort's return, its targeting of the innocent, he made amends. In the end, he stood with his family, fighting beside them in the Battle of Hogwarts, having learned that loyalty to a system is worthless if the system is unjust. Fred and George were perhaps the loudest rebels of them all. With every prank, every joke, every explosive candy or vanishing step, they poked holes in the pretentiousness of pure-blood society. They mocked tradition not to tear it down, but to expose its absurdity. Their shop, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, sold laughter in a time of fear. They created products for defense, not offense. They supplied students with tools to survive under Umbridge's regime. They resisted with innovation and irreverence, daring to believe that joy could be an act of rebellion. Ron, the youngest son, often struggled in the shadows of his brothers, but his friendship with Harry and Hermione taught him more than any classroom ever could. He stood by Hermione even when others mocked her blood status. When Draco Malfoy called her a mudblood, Ron's reaction was instantaneous and visceral. He drew his wand and cursed Malfoy, not because he was brave or righteous, but because he knew, deep down, that those words had no place in the world they were trying to save. It wasn't about Hermione alone, it was about drawing a line in the sand. And then there was Ginny. Fierce, talented, and unafraid to speak her mind, Ginny was perhaps the clearest symbol of everything the Weasleys believed in. She befriended Luna Lovegood, a girl mocked for her eccentricities, and stood by her without question. She dated boys from different houses, rejected the idea that identity should be boxed by sorting hats or surnames. And when the war came, she fought. Not as someone's little sister, but as a warrior in her own right. She helped lead the resistance at Hogwarts. She refused to sit out while others risked their lives. Her heart, like her family's, belonged to a future where blood didn't dictate destiny. Their home was humble, their robes often second-hand, their cauldron lids dented. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the strength of their convictions. When the Order of the Phoenix reassembled, the Weasleys didn't hesitate. They opened their home to fugitives, guarded secrets, and hosted meetings. They risked their lives not because they were brave, though they were, but because they were right. And being right, in times of darkness, demands action. Arthur continued to work in the Ministry under increasingly hostile leadership, passing information to the Order. Molly lost her brothers to Voldemort's followers, but never allowed vengeance to curdle into hatred. The term blood traitor was spat at them as if it were a curse, but the Weasleys turned it into armor. They raised their children with love and taught them that goodness has nothing to do with genealogy. "The thing about growing up with Fred and George," Ron once said, "is that you sort of start thinking anything's possible if you've got enough nerve." That belief wasn't just about pranks or daring escapes. It was about standing up, even when it was easier to stay silent. Lucius Malfoy tried to humiliate Arthur in front of his children. He called him names, insulted his job, and insinuated that Arthur's compassion for muggles was a stain on wizardkind. But Arthur knew better. He knew that silence is complicity. He could have turned away. Instead, he fought, fists flying in a bookstore, not for pride, but for principle. That moment wasn't about bruises, it was about showing his children that hate must be confronted loudly and publicly. The Weasleys were not perfect. They had tempers, made mistakes, lost their way at times, but in a world obsessed with pedigree and purity, they stood out as beacons of light. They did not just reject the ideology of blood superiority. They dismantled it day by day, word by word, kindness by kindness. Their love was a protest. Their family dinners, crowded and noisy, were sanctuaries of acceptance. Their laughter in the face of darkness was a declaration, "We do not believe in the things you do." When the war ended and the dust settled on Hogwarts, the Weasleys mourned their dead. Fred was gone, and the hole he left could never be filled. But even in grief, they held firm. They had paid the price for their beliefs, and yet they never once regretted the cost. Because the world that emerged, scarred, shaken, but free, was the world they had been fighting for all along. Every time they opened their home to the unwanted, every time they stood up to the Malfoys, every time they chose kindness over cruelty, the Weasleys rewrote the story of what it meant to be pure blood. Not a birthright, but a responsibility. Not a reason for pride, but a reason to protect those without the same privilege. In a castle divided by houses, in a world divided by blood, the Weasleys were the wall bridge. And that, more than any magic, was their greatest legacy. Number 22. George after losing Fred. George Weasley had always been part of a double act. Ever since the earliest pages of the Harry Potter books, he and Fred moved as one, not only in physical proximity, but in rhythm, mischief, laughter, and intention. They were a symphony of synchronized chaos, a blur of identical red hair and quick wit. When they opened Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, their prank shop in Diagon Alley, it was more than a business. It was their shared dream, birthed in Hogwarts corridors and scribbled in the margins of textbooks they never quite read. But when the Battle of Hogwarts stole Fred's life, that dream, and George's world, cracked irreparably. The films offer only a glimpse of this loss. The books, Rowling's interviews, and additional material reveal something far heavier, the grief that rewrote George Weasley. The moment Fred died, George lost more than a brother. He lost the other half of his voice. Rowling later admitted that George was never truly whole again. During the chaos of battle, as walls collapsed and lives were lost, Fred's death is described with painful simplicity. And that's the last time Fred Weasley was ever seen alive. It is a sentence that lands with cruel finality. No cinematic framing could do it justice. Not when it is the silence that follows Fred's death which truly shapes George. There is no explosion, no slow-motion mourning, just a void where once had been laughter. In The Deathly Hallows, the scene in the Great Hall where Mrs. Weasley weeps over Fred's body is one of the most haunting images, but it is George who is almost invisible in his grief. Rowling doesn't spell out his devastation because she doesn't need to. George is there, kneeling beside his twin's lifeless form, and every reader understands the unspeakable bond that has just been severed. In interviews, Rowling confessed that writing Fred's death was one of the most difficult decisions she ever made, specifically because of George. She acknowledged that George, from that moment on, would live a half-life. In the aftermath of the war, George could barely function. Though the books end before showing us the full extent of his grief, later materials, including Rowling's online writings and Pottermore entries, confirm what many readers feared. He fell into silence. The boy who once filled rooms with tricks and laughter could barely speak. His spark, a trademark Weasley fire, dimmed. He returned to Diagon Alley, but not to celebrate. The shop that had once burst with colour and chaos now felt like a mausoleum. Every shelf, every prank, every enchanted object was haunted by Fred. At first, George didn't know if he could reopen the shop. It had been their dream, not just his. He would enter and be paralysed by memories. The smell of the fireworks, the glitter of decoy detonators, the whir of fanged frisbees, all were reminders of Fred's laugh, Fred's hands, Fred's ideas. Some days George would just sit behind the counter and stare at the door, half expecting his brother to walk in with some new invention. The hardest part was that sometimes he could hear him, not in voice but in the echo of every idea they'd ever shared. The most tragic detail is something Rowling confirmed in a post-publication Q&A. George never fully regained his hearing in one ear, the result of a curse from Severus Snape during the escape from Privet Drive. It was Fred who joked that George was now holy in reference to his missing ear. After Fred's death, that joke stopped being funny. It became a reminder, not just of the loss of sound, but of the loss of Fred. That hole became symbolic, a literal absence George could never repair. But George didn't completely shut down. Slowly, very slowly, he began to rebuild. The Weasley family, always the net that caught their own, held him tightly. Ron visited the shop often, not to buy anything, but just to be present. Ginny, perhaps the fiercest sibling in love, made it her mission to ensure George never drifted too far. Their presence didn't fill the space Fred left, but it helped George hold on to the light. With their support, he decided to reopen Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, but it would never be the same. Running the shop alone was a cruel echo of the past. George often spoke less, laughed less, smiled less, but he poured himself into creation, as if inventing new pranks was the only way to keep Fred's voice alive. Customers who returned to the store after the war noted that it had changed. It was still brilliant, still innovative, but there was a melancholy beneath the mischief. George stopped using the "we" in marketing. The posters became simpler. There were no more life-sized illusions of the twins. Only George. Eventually, someone else began helping at the shop. Angelina Johnson. The former Gryffindor Quidditch captain, once Fred's date to the Yule Ball, had grown close to George after the war. Their shared grief, their shared love for Fred, became the strange foundation of something new. Rowling's revelation that George married Angelina sparked controversy among fans. Some felt it was strange, but others understood. Who else could truly grasp what he had lost? Their marriage was not a perfect fairy tale, but it was healing. Angelina, strong-willed and brave, refused to let George disappear into his grief. She encouraged him to laugh again. Not like before, not carelessly, but consciously. Together they built a life not in spite of Fred's memory, but in honor of it. When their first child was born, George didn't hesitate. He named the boy Fred Weasley II. That name was no replacement. George never intended it to be. Naming his son after his twin was both a tribute and a promise that Fred's spirit would never be forgotten. Little Fred became the living echo of the past, not a ghost, but a continuation. And though George knew his son could never be exactly like his brother, he smiled when Fred II made his first joke, pulled his first prank, and set off his first firework. George's journey was never about erasing grief. It was about learning to live with it. In the Deathly Hallows there is a line that reads, "The world had ended, so why were the birds still singing?" That is how George must have felt every morning. But over time, he understood that the world keeps moving. Laughter, once shared with a twin, could still exist. Not to replace Fred, but to remember him. Some stories in the wizarding world are loud and heroic. George's is quieter. It is the story of endurance. He wasn't the chosen one. He didn't defeat Voldemort. He didn't lead armies. He simply chose to survive, to keep building what he and Fred had dreamed, and to raise a son who would know the name of the uncle he never met. That kind of courage, the everyday bravery of getting up and facing a world where half your soul is missing, is just as powerful. There is a passage in Rowling's later writings where she reflects on the Weasley twins and their impact on readers. She wrote, "Fred and George were joy in human form. Losing one was the hardest thing I ever wrote." That confession carries weight. It means George's pain was intentional. He wasn't left behind as a side character. He was a mirror for all who have lost someone and wondered how to laugh again. To truly understand George is to understand silence. It is to know that behind every joke he made after the war, there was once a pause, a hesitation, a whisper of Fred's voice. Even when he laughed again, even when the shop roared with colour, there was always an empty space next to him, a space only Fred could fill. Rowling admitted that George would never be the same, and fans know that means something more permanent than grief. It means transformation. Years later, when James Sirius Potter and Albus Severus passed through Diagon Alley for school supplies, they entered Weasley's Wizard Wheezes and met the man behind the counter. George, older now but still quick with a wink, handed them skiving snack boxes and exploding bonbons. He told them stories, some true, some invented. But behind his smile there was always one photo on the shelf that he never dusted. It was Fred grinning. George Weasley was never just the funny twin. He became something far more important, a man who bore the weight of absence and chose every day to build joy anyway. His story teaches that laughter can be a form of memory, that even grief can bloom into legacy. Fred's name lived on not just in a child, but in every burst of fireworks over Diagon Alley, because for George, every explosion was a heartbeat, a promise, a reminder. Fred Weasley was here, and so was he. Number 23, Arthur nearly died from Nagini's attack. Arthur Weasley was always a character of gentle humour and unwavering loyalty, a man fascinated by muggle plugs and willing to risk everything for the Order of the Phoenix. He was not the kind of wizard who sought danger, yet danger came to him in one of the darkest moments in the Order of the Phoenix, a scene that remains etched in the memories of readers who discovered it not through the films, but through the vivid pages of J.K. Rowling's book. In a moment both terrifying and pivotal, Arthur's life was nearly ended by Voldemort's monstrous serpent, Nagini, and the only reason he survived was a psychic scream echoing through the mind of a 16-year-old boy. Harry Potter's dream wasn't truly a dream, it was a vision, raw, real, and soaked in blood. The corridors of the Department of Mysteries stretched cold and silent, except for the echo of hissing. Harry wasn't himself in that moment. His mind had become Voldemort's, his body no longer his own. Through slitted eyes and primal instinct, he watched as Nagini slithered forward, coiled, and struck. Again and again the serpent lunged at Arthur Weasley, fangs puncturing flesh, venom flooding his veins. The corridor was softly lit and the floor was gleaming. Mr. Weasley was on the ground, his glasses askew, blood gushing from deep puncture wounds. That single sentence was enough to paralyze readers in shock. This was no minor skirmish. This was an assassination attempt, one that should have succeeded, and Harry could do nothing. He saw Arthur's agony. He felt the snake's satisfaction. He was the snake, curled up on the floor, feeling his victim's struggles growing weaker. The horror of being inside the mind of the attacker, rather than the victim, left Harry shaken in a way he could not explain. When he awoke, screaming in the Gryffindor common room, Ron's panicked voice was drowned by the overwhelming certainty that something real, something monstrous had just occurred. That night changed everything. It was the first time Harry's mind had become a channel for Voldemort's will. It was the first time someone he loved almost died because of it. Dumbledore, stoic and distant, didn't hesitate. He called for help. "We need to find Arthur Weasley. He is in grave danger." Within minutes, the order moved. Arthur was found, barely conscious, blood loss extreme, the venom still fighting to shut down his system. He had been guarding the entrance to the Hall of Prophecies, a target of utmost importance to Voldemort. Nagini had been sent not to warn, but to kill. And she would have succeeded had Harry's vision come only minutes later. Molly Weasley, upon hearing the news, nearly collapsed. Her screams echoed through the walls of Grimmauld Place. "Not Arthur! Please, not Arthur!" For once, the Weasleys, who always brought light to dark places, stood on the edge of destruction. Arthur's recovery was long and painful. St. Mungo's Hospital became his second home. He was bitten in the chest, legs, arms. His whole body was a patchwork of wounds. Antivenoms were barely effective against Nagini's magic-infused venom, and even the healers could not hide their unease. One whispered, "We've never treated a wound like this before." Fred and George went silent. Ron paced until his shoes wore down. Ginny refused to leave the hospital room. Molly sat with her husband day and night, her knitting untouched, her face pale. This was not just an injury, it was a near brush with death that shook the family's foundation. But the true terror lay in what the attack revealed. If Harry could see through Voldemort's eyes, then Voldemort might see through Harry's. The connection was no longer a one-way street. It was a tunnel carved deep into both their minds, and Dumbledore knew it could not be allowed to remain open. That was when he made the difficult decision to distance himself from Harry, believing that proximity might strengthen the link. "I cared about you too much," he later admitted. "I thought I was doing the right thing." But to Harry, the silence felt like abandonment. The attack on Arthur became the turning point in the war against Voldemort. Dumbledore's focus turned fully to occlumency, an ancient mental art meant to block intrusion into the mind, and so Severus Snape was tasked with teaching Harry how to shield himself. The irony was cruel. The one man Harry despised was now the one responsible for protecting his thoughts. Lessons began in the dungeon, and they were brutal. Snape's cold voice echoed, "Clear your mind, Potter!" But Harry struggled. The pain of that night, Arthur's blood seeping into the ministry floor, haunted him. Each time Harry failed to close his mind, Voldemort crept deeper. The dreams became more vivid, the sense of being watched more constant, and as the bond intensified, so did the danger for those Harry loved. Sirius, already at risk, became more of a target. Hermione saw the writing on the wall. "He's using your connection. We have to stop it." But even she couldn't sever it. It had been forged in childhood, by prophecy, by fate, and now sealed in blood. Arthur's attack was never shown in the films. It remains a moment known only to readers, one of those brutal, intimate events that could not fit neatly into a 2-hour runtime. Yet its absence robbed moviegoers of one of the most emotionally charged episodes in the series. For the Weasleys, it marked the first time their family was truly torn by the war. Bill and Charlie were summoned from abroad. Percy, estranged and prideful, did not come. That silence hurt Molly more than any wound. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. Arthur, when he finally could speak again, refused to dwell on the pain. "At least now I know how muggles feel about snake bites," he joked weakly, holding Molly's hand. But the scars remained. Not all of them were physical. He could no longer sleep easily. He flinched at sudden movement, and every full moon the wounds burned anew. Even Fred and George, always quick with a joke, became more careful around their father. They built him a clock that beeped if his heart rate rose too high. For Harry, the vision solidified something grim and permanent. Voldemort wasn't just a threat to the wizarding world. He was a threat to Harry's world, his found family, his fragile circle of safety. Arthur had always been a father figure in the shadows. Not as stern as Dumbledore, not as absent as James, just kind, patient, and full of quirky wisdom. Losing him would have torn a hole in Harry's life. And that knowledge made Harry desperate. Desperate to learn occlumency, desperate to find the prophecy, desperate to end it all. But Arthur's survival wasn't just luck. It was a reminder of the Order's constant vigilance. The network worked. Kingsley and Tonks were not far. Dumbledore acted immediately. Molly's intuition led her to rush to Grimmauld Place even before the owl arrived. These people were a family by more than blood. They were soldiers in the same war, and Arthur, for all his gentleness, proved that no one, not even the kindest of men, was safe from Voldemort's wrath. Nagini, too, became more than a beast after that night. She wasn't just a pet. She was a weapon, intelligent, strategic, lethal. Dumbledore suspected, long before anyone else, that she was more than flesh and blood. "There is a part of him in her," he murmured once. Arthur's blood may have been the first spilled in her campaign. It would not be the last, but it was the first warning sign. Voldemort had grown bolder, more ruthless, less human. Years later, when Harry would stand over Nagini's shattered body during the Battle of Hogwarts, part of him remembered that night. The corridor, the blood, the helplessness. Killing her wasn't just a tactical move, it was personal, a piece of vengeance long owed, because Nagini had almost taken Arthur. Had she succeeded, perhaps the Weasleys would have fractured, perhaps Molly would have broken, perhaps Harry would have lost his will to fight. And yet, it didn't happen. Against odds, Arthur lived, and he lived to see Fred invent skiving snack boxes, to see Ginny grow into a warrior, to see Ron rise beyond fear. He danced with Molly at Bill's wedding. He wept when Fred died, and in the chaos of war, he stood firm, not as a hero with a wand raised, but as a man who refused to give in to bitterness or hate. Voldemort could not destroy that. That night in the Department of Mysteries never made the headlines. It wasn't in the Prophet, it wasn't retold in classrooms, but it was remembered by those who mattered. The scar on Arthur's side, the way Molly gripped his hand a little too tight, the way Harry looked at him afterward, those were the marks of survival. Quiet, private, sacred. For readers, it remains a chilling moment, one of the first times we truly see the cost of the war, not in abstract terms but in spilled blood. Arthur's attack is a reminder that this story, for all its magic and wonder, was always about the quiet people caught in loud storms. He didn't ask to be a hero, but that night Arthur Weasley became one, not through combat but through endurance, through being targeted by evil and surviving it, through being a father who lived to hold his children another day. Number 24. Ginny wrote about Quidditch for the Prophet. Ginny Weasley's journey after Hogwarts was never properly explored in the Harry Potter films, leaving much of her adult life shrouded in mystery for those who only watch the movies. But readers of J.K. Rowling's extended canon, including the epilogue of Deathly Hallows, Pottermore updates, and post-publication interviews, were granted a rare glimpse into Ginny's professional life. Not only did she achieve her childhood dream of playing professional Quidditch, but she went on to become one of the most respected sports journalists in the wizarding world. A rare dual achievement, it placed her in the unique position of shaping the conversation around the very sport she once played at the highest level. This transition from athlete to analyst was not just a career shift, it was a quiet revolution in magical media, led by a woman many underestimated. After the Battle of Hogwarts, Ginny joined the Holyhead Harpies, the all-female team known for their aggressive and fast-paced style of play. For Ginny, this wasn't merely a job, it was a natural evolution of her lifelong passion. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry watches her play as Seeker when he is banned from the team, already noting her potential. She's good, he thinks to himself, very good. But it wasn't until post-Hogwarts that she truly proved her mettle, signing with the Harpies and facing off against seasoned professionals. The Harpies, whose emerald green robes were famous in the league, welcomed Ginny for her fierce drive and impeccable flying. According to Rowling, Ginny played several seasons with the team before retiring on her own terms, not due to injury or lack of form, but because she sought something more meaningful beyond the field. It was a surprising pivot for many fans, Ginny Weasley, the youngest child in a family of pranksters and underdogs, becoming a figure of intellectual authority in journalism, but for those who understood her background, it was inevitable. From her first year, when she was possessed by Tom Riddle's diary, Ginny developed a deep relationship with the written word. While her school years were marked by athletic success, dueling skills, and a growing confidence, they were also shaped by introspection and a sharp understanding of people. That blend of intuition and experience translated perfectly into her writing, and so, once she retired from professional Quidditch, Ginny joined the Daily Prophet not as a mere contributor, but as a leading sports correspondent. Her articles quickly gained attention, Unlike the shallow reporting that had plagued the Prophet under Rita Skeeter's sensationalist reign, Ginny's pieces were grounded in first-hand knowledge. She wrote about the dynamics of team play, the psychological pressure of the Quidditch World Cup, and the importance of youth leagues in shaping future stars. One memorable piece focused on Victor Crumb's return to international Quidditch during the 2014 World Cup. "He moves with the grace of a man who has nothing to prove and everything to enjoy," she wrote. "Crumb plays now for the love of flight, not for trophies, and that is why he soars." That line was quoted in both magical and muggle sports discussions, praised for its poetic depth and insight into aging athletes. Ginny was never interested in glorifying victory or shaming defeat. Her writing delved into the heart of the sport. When the Holyhead Harpies suffered a devastating loss in the European League finals, Ginny's column didn't focus on missed goals or failed saves. Instead, she wrote about the unity of the team in the face of adversity, the camaraderie that kept them flying. "Quidditch is not about winning," she penned. "It is about the 1,000 choices that lead us to the goalpost and the people who fly with us." For young readers, her articles were more than sports commentary. They were lessons in resilience, teamwork, and personal growth. Her most widely read series came during the 2014 Quidditch World Cup, hosted in Patagonia. The tournament was filled with drama, rivalries, injuries, and unexpected comebacks. But Ginny's dispatches from the field gave the event a human pulse. She wrote about the Wimborne Wasps chaser Ayodele Onwudiwe, who had overcome a debilitating back injury to return to the Nigerian national team. She described in vivid detail the stands erupting in thunderous applause when Onwudiwe scored a daring double-loop goal. "He flew like he had wings beyond his broom," Ginny wrote, and in that moment the crowd forgot every allegiance, every flag, every colour, but joy. One of her most moving stories featured the Japanese team's captain Noriko Saito, who had led her squad through a difficult qualifying round while coping with the loss of her brother, a fellow Quidditch player, in a magical storm accident. Ginny didn't merely write about the scores, she spoke of the emotional weight carried by athletes, of the invisible burdens that every match carried. "Quidditch," she said, "is not an escape from grief, it is a language in which grief can speak." Those words circulated far beyond the magical world, translated into multiple languages, even picked up by Muggle fans of Rowling's fictional sport. Ginny also wasn't afraid to critique. In an exposé that caused ripples across the Quidditch community, she investigated the unfair treatment of Goblin and Centaur players in regional leagues. Despite magical law banning discrimination, some team owners continued to deny contracts to non-human players. Ginny's article, "One Broom, One Pitch, Quidditch for All," stirred public outrage and forced the Department of Magical Games and Sports to review its policies. Her fearless advocacy earned her praise from Hermione Granger, now Minister for Magic, who publicly thanked Ginny for holding our institutions accountable with grace, intellect, and fire. Her influence reached its peak during the timeline of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. In the stage play, Ginny appears alongside Harry at a pivotal time in their adult lives. The play references a Quidditch tournament taking place in the background, and while the focus is on family and time travel, the subtext reveals Ginny's continuing commitment to journalism. She wasn't merely a supportive spouse, she was a working journalist covering the sport she loved. Rowling later confirmed that Ginny had travelled with Harry in part because she was assigned to report on the tournament. Her pieces from that era were some of the Prophet's most widely circulated stories, highlighting her status as a public intellectual and sports icon. Even her interactions with readers became legendary. Ginny was known to respond to young witches and wizards who wrote to her, aspiring to careers in Quidditch or journalism. One girl from Ottery St. Catchpole, aged 9, sent a letter asking whether it was harder to be a player or a writer. Ginny's reply was published in the Prophet's Letters section. "Both ask the same question," she wrote. "How far are you willing to fly, not just above the pitch, but above fear?" The answer, always, is as far as your heart can carry you. Her reputation became so formidable that new players actively sought her out for interviews, not for the fame, but for the honesty. "Ginny sees what others miss," said Niko Razmovich, a seeker for the Russian national team. "She doesn't ask how many goals we scored. She asks what kept us going when we almost gave up." Her interviews weren't sound bites. They were conversations. She once spent 4 hours with French beater Clémence Duvet discussing the pressure of representing a nation on foreign soil. The resulting profile didn't just describe Duvet's talent, it offered a portrait of courage, exhaustion, and the price of expectation. Ginny's writing style also stood out. She favored long-form columns over short blurbs, often weaving personal anecdotes into her analysis. In a column titled "The Match I'll Never Forget," she recounted the time she watched her brothers, Fred and George, play an impromptu match on Christmas Eve using enchanted pumpkins as quaffles. "They were terrible," she admitted, "but they laughed like kings, and for that hour our garden was Wembley Stadium." It wasn't about technical prowess, it was about joy. Her pieces reminded readers that Quidditch was, at its core, a game born from love. Rowling herself noted in an interview that Ginny's journalistic voice was intentionally crafted as a counterbalance to the spectacle-driven culture of magical reporting. Where Rita Skeeter manipulated quotes with her enchanted quill, Ginny used her words to restore dignity to a sport often cheapened by drama. She never relied on scandal or gossip to sell a story. Instead, she believed in truth, in passion, and in the idea that the best story was often the one hiding in plain sight. Her legacy continues to influence magical sports writing. At the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the student-run Hogwarts Herald now runs an annual Ginny Weasley Journalism Award given to the most promising young writer in the school. Past winners have gone on to internships at the Prophet, many of them citing Ginny as their inspiration. One such winner, Marisol Trengrove, said, "Ginny didn't just write about Quidditch, she taught us why it matters." The award hangs in the Gryffindor common room each spring, a reminder that courage takes many forms. Even long after her active career, Ginny continued to write. Her retrospective series, Through the Rings, A Life in Quidditch, ran for a full year and remains the most read feature in Prophet archives. In it, she examined how the sport shaped her worldview, her family, and her future. She described the feeling of lifting off the pitch after her final match. "The wind didn't ask where I was going," she wrote. "It just carried me, as it always had, towards something I didn't yet understand but was finally ready for." Ginny's evolution from seeker to seeker of truth stands as one of the most underrated but inspiring arcs in the Harry Potter universe. For fans who know only the films, she may seem like a footnote to Harry's story. But for readers who followed the deeper threads of her life, Ginny Weasley became a legend in her own right. Not because she stood in someone's shadow, but because she followed the wind wherever it led, and sometimes it led her straight into history. Number 25. The meaning behind the Weasley children's names. Arthur Weasley, the quiet, eccentric father of 7 red-haired children, might at first seem like a man whose main passion lies in muggle plugs and rubber ducks. Yet the weight of his name betrays a deeper, almost mythical purpose in the narrative of Harry Potter. Arthur, named after the once and future king, leads a family that is more than simply a collection of lovable oddballs. The Weasleys are a quiet lineage of modern knights, and their names, chosen carefully by Molly and Arthur, serve as subtle prophecies of their roles in the war to come. In the tapestry of Rowling's universe, where names carry power and meaning, the Weasleys are woven together by threads of ancient legend and quiet heroism. Bill Weasley, whose real name is William, echoes the kings and warriors of British history. William the Conqueror springs to mind, a figure who united and ruled with strength and vision. Bill the eldest is not only the first to leave the nest, but the first to confront danger head-on in the world outside of Hogwarts. As a curse breaker for Gringotts, he braves tombs in Egypt, and later risks his life during the Second Wizarding War. His bravery is rewarded not with safety, but with scars, both physical and emotional, after Fenrir Greyback's attack. Yet like the William of history, he carries on. He marries Fleur Delacour, bringing light and elegance into the rugged life of a Weasley warrior. Their wedding, though disrupted by war, stands as a beacon of hope, just as Arthurian romances did in the shadows of conflict. Charlie, short for Charles, brings with him the aura of noble hunters and dragon tamers. Charles the Great, Charlemagne, is echoed in the quiet strength of the second Weasley son. Charlie works with dragons in Romania, and while he plays a less prominent role in the books, his absence from the main stage is not a mark of insignificance. Instead, like a knight-errant in a distant land, Charlie serves the fight against darkness in his own elemental way. Dragons, after all, are creatures of legend, and Charlie's work with them feels like a whisper from the Age of Heroes. When he appears in the Battle of Hogwarts, he arrives like a mythic figure summoned from afar. Drawn back to the heart of Britain when its fate hangs in the balance. Percy Weasley's name draws from Perseus, the Greek hero who beheaded Medusa. This parallel is deeply ironic, for Percy begins his arc blinded by ambition, obsessed with rules, and seduced by the Ministry of Magic. Yet his journey is one of falling and rising, like the heroes of old. He forsakes his family in pursuit of personal greatness, believing himself to be wiser and more righteous than those who raised him. But in the final battle, Percy returns, weeping and shattered, and fights alongside his brothers in the name of love and justice. When he breaks down after Fred's death, Percy was shaking his brother, and Ron was kneeling beside them, and Fred's eyes stared without seeing. He becomes, finally, the hero his name always promised he could be. Fred and George Weasley are not twins in myth, but they carry echoes of ancient duos, Castor and Pollux, or even the trickster twins from Celtic legends. Fred, short for Frederick, is a name linked to peace and rulership, while George, patron saint of England, is the dragon slayer himself. The irony of their roles, comic relief, pranksters, inventors, is that beneath their laughter lies extraordinary courage. In creating their joke shop, they do more than entertain. They resist tyranny with joy. During the rule of Dolores Umbridge, it is Fred and George who openly rebel, launching fireworks and swamp spells that become acts of protest. "Give her hell from us, Peeves," Fred tells the poltergeist, laughing in the face of oppression. In the final battle, George loses his twin, and in that moment the light of one twin becomes the shadow of the other. The cost of war is written in their names, and the price of bravery is paid in full. Ronald, the sixth child, bears a name that means ruler's counselor, and it suits him in a strangely poetic way. Ron is never the chosen one, nor the brightest, nor the strongest, but he is the heart. He stands by Harry from the beginning, offering loyalty even when afraid, humour even in despair. In the legend of King Arthur, every ruler needs a loyal knight at his side, a protector whose strength is in his unwavering presence. Ron's place beside Harry is not earned through brilliance, but through constancy. "We're with you whatever happens," he says, in a moment when others falter. Ron's growth is not by glory, but by endurance, and the quiet way he becomes a man of his own, without ever abandoning those he loves. And then there is Ginny, whose full name, Ginevra, is a rare gem in the world of wizardry. Ginevra is the Italian form of Guinevere, the queen of Arthurian legend, who is both beloved and tragic. Ginny, the youngest and only daughter, seems at first like a quiet girl with a crush, but Rowling reveals her strength slowly, and by the time the war begins, Ginny is a fierce duelist, a rebel, and a leader in her own right. "The thing about growing up with Fred and George," she says, "is that you sort of start thinking anything's possible if you've got enough nerve." Ginny's nerve becomes her sword. She kisses Harry not as a damsel, but as a warrior. she fights at Hogwarts. With the courage of a lioness, protecting her school, her friends, and the very spirit of resistance. The name Ginevra, once bound to a queen caught in tragedy, is reborn in Ginny as a new kind of royalty, fierce, free, and utterly modern. Molly Weasley, who named them all, is more than a matron. She is the weaver of destiny. Her choices, seemingly maternal and sentimental, shape a family that embodies old-world virtues in a modern war. Love, loyalty, sacrifice, honor. These are the traits of knights and queens. When Molly screams, "Not my daughter, you bitch," and duels Bellatrix Lestrange, she does so not only as a mother protecting her child, but as a warrior standing against darkness. Her act is not just emotional, it is mythic. Bellatrix, a woman of death, is struck down by a woman of life. In that moment, Molly becomes the final guardian of the legacy she named into existence. The Weasleys are not pureblood snobs. They are mocked by the Malfoys, dismissed by bureaucrats, and often overlooked. But their names, like whispers from legend, mark them as the true nobility of the wizarding world. They are what the old stories spoke of, those who fight for good, not because they seek glory, but because they must. The strength of the Weasleys lies not in wealth or prestige, but in a moral compass set toward courage and compassion. In the wizarding world, where prophecy and symbolism run through every chapter, the naming of characters is no accident. J.K. Rowling, a scholar of classics and folklore, builds the Weasley family like a myth reborn. They are a round table of their own kind, humble, mismatched, imperfect, and yet bound by an unshakable code. Each name carries echoes of a higher calling, and each child lives up to it in a way that feels organic and earned. The contrast between the Weasleys and the Malfoys becomes even more pronounced when viewed through the lens of legacy. The Malfoys carry Roman and aristocratic names, Lucius, Narcissa, Draco, and they cling to an image of grandeur. But it is the Weasleys, with their homespun names and threadbare robes, who live out the values of the heroes of old. They do not claim greatness, they prove it. This is why readers of only the films miss the deeper threads of meaning. In the books, these names are not thrown away in passing, but repeated with purpose, especially as the story progresses. The dignity of Percy, the grief of George, the quiet strength of Charlie, all are given space to grow. These arcs do not end in perfection, but in resolution, in the way real legends often do, bittersweet and eternal. Even the burrow itself, crooked and magical, feels like something from a tale of old, a cottage on the edge of the forest where heroes are raised in warmth and wonder. It is a place where Arthur rules not with a crown, but with kindness, where Molly, the fierce and loving matriarch, passes down not just sweaters and stew, but the courage to stand for what is right. The significance of names echoes even into the next generation. Harry names his own son Albus Severus, but Ginny gives her children names that honour not only the past, but the future, James, Lily, and Hugo. The naming continues because the story does not end. It folds forward, like time itself, from one legend to another, from one war to the next. In the end, the Weasleys are not just characters, they are symbols, living echoes of the myths that shaped Britain's past, reimagined for a world of magic and wonder. Each name is a promise, and each child fulfills it not by fate, but by choice. They remind us that heroism isn't about power or pedigree. It's about love, loyalty, and the strength to do what's right, even when no one is watching. And so, through Molly's careful naming, we come to see the Weasley family not just as comic relief or noble allies. They are the very soul of the story. They are the echo of Arthur's Round Table, reborn in red hair and hand-me-downs. They are the reminder that in every age, heroes rise not from palaces, but from humble homes, and that sometimes the oldest names carry the truest magic of all. Number 26. The twins were inventors at Hogwarts. Fred and George Weasley had never been content with merely laughing at the world. They wanted to shape it through laughter. Their journey into mischief was not random chaos, but a calculated path of innovation, carefully charted in the dormitories of Gryffindor Tower. While most students in Hogwarts spent their free time finishing essays or practicing wand movements, the twins were knee-deep in experimental concoctions, whispering formulas behind closed curtains, scribbling notes into tattered leather-bound notebooks, and transfiguring the common room into a chaotic testing ground of unpredictable results. Even in their early years, their ambition went far beyond jokes. They were building a business, brick by brick, prank by prank. The books offer small glimpses of their underground operations, details that often evade the casual reader. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, there is a moment where Hermione Granger confronts Fred and George in the Gryffindor common room. "You're trying to sell skiving snack boxes in the corridors again." But long before they had a name or packaging, these snack boxes had been prototypes, colourful, volatile prototypes. Nosebleed nougats that caused spontaneous gushing, puking pastilles that guaranteed instant nausea, and fainting fancies that could render the most suspicious prefect unconscious, all formed part of a dream that had started in their 4th year and only grew bolder with time. One might believe their antics were simply schoolboy pranks, but Fred and George approached their craft with the diligence of scholars. They created trial batches of their inventions in makeshift labs, often behind the red velvet curtain that hung in their shared dormitory. Using self-replenishing cauldrons and ingredients stolen, or borrowed as they put it, from the potions cupboard, they blended magical substances with surprising finesse. It was there, under the gentle hum of sleeping students and the watchful gaze of the fat lady's portrait, that the foundation of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes was built. Their test subjects were usually unsuspecting first years. They targeted the eager, the naive, the curious, students willing to accept a strange toffee from an upperclassman with a grin. Dennis Creevey once found himself sneezing feathers for half an hour, while a second-year Hufflepuff spent a day speaking in spontaneous Shakespearean verse after biting into a wrong prototype. Fred wrote detailed observations in the margins of their spellbooks, and George revised the formulas until the effects became predictable. The line between prank and potion blurred, and they were proud of that. Their methods weren't entirely ethical, but they were ruthlessly effective. Peeves the poltergeist, normally a menace to all, developed a genuine affection for the twins. He saw in them kindred spirits. He would often help them distribute flyers or distract teachers while they escaped. Once, Fred and George gifted Peeves a box of belch bubbles, enchanted to burst into rude sounds upon contact. Peeves responded by launching a week-long, gassy ghost campaign, much to Filch's horror. When Professor McGonagall caught wind of the twins' growing influence, she did not punish them outright. Instead, she warned them with a look sharper than any spell. Just because it's clever doesn't make it legal. They stashed their products beneath loose floorboards and inside hollowed-out spellbooks. George even enchanted his trunk to hide an entire storage compartment, accessible only through a coded knock and password. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Ron mentions the twins having some big secret, and it's clear by then that their small-scale enterprise had grown far beyond school shenanigans. With each successful prank, their reputation swelled, and so did their confidence. But they needed capital, and capital was scarce in the Burrow. When Harry Potter won the Triwizard Tournament and received the 1,000 Galleon prize, he shocked everyone by handing it over to Fred and George. "Use it to start your joke shop," Harry said. That moment, though brief in the book, was the spark that lit the fuse. The twins had always planned to go professional, but Harry's gesture wasn't just generosity, it was validation. It confirmed what they'd always known in their hearts, that their work mattered, that joy was a currency worth investing in. From that day forward, they no longer viewed themselves as students moonlighting as pranksters. They were entrepreneurs with a mission. They doubled their research efforts, perfecting their skiving snack boxes to fool even Madame Pomfrey. The test results improved, and so did the design. Fred suggested colour-coding the treats to indicate their function: purple for fainting fancies, orange for nosebleed nougats. George developed a counter-candy to reverse the symptoms. Their system became intricate and professional, blending mischief with business acumen. They never waited for graduation. In their final year, when Hogwarts turned into a fortress under Dolores Umbridge's rule, they escalated their operations. They became folk heroes of rebellion, launching fireworks, breeding chaos, and distributing prank items like leaflets in wartime. It was during this era that they showcased the portable swamp, an invention that stunned even Professor Flitwick. The swamp consumed an entire corridor and remained there for weeks as a symbol of resistance. "I think the swamp was a marvelous bit of magic," Flitwick whispered with a rare smile, before preserving a square of it in tribute. Behind their charisma and chaos was a silent discipline. They wrote everything down: failed combinations, successful trials, suggested improvements. Their notebooks were sacred, filled with diagrams, ingredient lists, and enchantment variants. Once, a Slytherin tried to steal one, only to find himself stuck inside a broom cupboard for 3 hours, thanks to an enchantment Fred dubbed Pranker's Revenge. Their research was serious, their process methodical. They may have lacked NEWTs, but they had mastery in a field of their own design. In one scene from Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, we learn that their joke shop has not only opened but flourished beyond anyone's expectations. The descriptions are vivid. The place was packed with customers. Fred and George were standing behind the counter, wearing magenta robes, selling boxes of the latest inventions. Their shop, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, wasn't merely a commercial success. It was a testament to years of dormitory experiments and whispered spells in the dark. Among the items on sale were patented daydream charms, carefully crafted illusions that transported the user into fantastical scenarios, and Peruvian instant darkness powder, a substance so effective it was eventually used by Dumbledore's army. These weren't toys, they were tools, engineered with precision. The Ministry of Magic had even attempted to regulate their goods, but as George once smirked, "You can't outlaw laughter." Their older brothers never fully understood them. Percy scoffed at their ambitions, accusing them of wasting their talents. Even Mrs. Weasley hoped they'd find real jobs at the ministry. But Bill admired their independence, and Charlie once remarked that no dragon could outsmart a Weasley twin. They stood as a contrast to the rule-following rigidity of wizarding society. In a world obsessed with tradition and hierarchy, Fred and George invented joy, bottled it, and sold it by the box. One of the lesser-known facts comes from a brief exchange in the books when Fred explains to Ron that they've been developing the snack boxes for years now. This offhand line holds more weight than it seems. It suggests that even when Voldemort returned, even when fear hung over every fireplace and Fleur network, the twins kept building a sanctuary of mirth. Their shop would become one of the few places in Diagon Alley still glowing with life, attracting customers from all over Britain, desperate for a laugh in grim times. Tragically, Fred's story ends during the Battle of Hogwarts. His death is a blow that reverberates through the final pages, a reminder that even light-hearted heroes are not spared in dark times. But in that grief lies the magnitude of their legacy. Fred died in the very halls where his dream began, not as a sidekick, but as a founder, a fighter, and a craftsman of joy. His work lived on in every howler cushion, every spell-deflecting shield cloak, every giggle from a first year who bit into the wrong end of a ton-tongue toffee. George carried on the business alone, but never removed Fred's name from the shop sign. It remained Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, a partnership sealed in magic and mischief. He kept the notebooks, continued the experiments, and later took on protégés, training a new generation of magical innovators. Their story is not one of chaos, it is one of courage, of daring to build something joyful in a world that often forgot to laugh.